One of the things that you heard me doing yesterday were attributional discussions, and those are questions that we ask parents to try to get them to think about what the rationale for a strategy is. And I used at various points a number of different kinds, and I just want to mention those briefly. One is what we sometimes call a social learning attribution. What's the lesson that would teach your child? So a parent may take the time to spend some time creating a nice consistent routine in the evening and work at that, and you could say, well, what's the lesson you're teaching your son in doing that? Or a parent might say, well, first you get your homework done, and then you guys can get on the internet. First your homework, then you can get on the internet. And they stick to that consistently over time. And one of the questions we could ask parents is, what's the lesson that you're teaching kids when you take the time to do that? And is that an important lesson? So we often ask about a social learning attribution. What are parents teaching kids via the strategies that they use? Another is a communicative attribution, and examples of those might be, what's the message you're giving your kid and taking the time to do that? In the attending session where parents are looking for ways to show interest in kids and praise them for things that they've done well, compliment them if you would, this is a good attribution. What's the message you're giving kids and taking the time to show interest in what they've been doing? Parents say, well, that is important to me, that I'm interested in what he's doing, that I care about him. And these are often affective messages. They often elicit some strong feelings on the part of parents, and they motivate parents in different ways than the more logical lesson teaching strategies that are part of the social learning attribution. You also heard a lot of long-term attributions, and we put a lot of emphasis on the importance of thinking about the impact of things that you do as a parent over a long period of time. Not what can I do when he does that and things will stop, but how can I interact over a long period of time in a way that's going to build an effective relationship, that's going to go in directions that are important to me. So long-term attribution. Supposing we did that consistently. Stuck to those routines. First you get your homework done, then you guys can play computers, then you can watch television, then you can do some things that are fun. And we made that part of the routine, and we were consistent as possible in doing that. And we kept that up this month, the next month, and right on through grade 4 and grade 5 and grade 6. And we just made that a part of the structure and routine around our home. What would happen over time? And parents generally recognize that, come on in. Why don't you join this group over here? Thank you. Parents generally recognize that little things that they do on a daily basis, while they're not likely to have much of an effect in the short term, they may have a larger effect in the long term. So attributional questions are a key part of the cognitive components of the program, if you would. Attributional discussions are conducted with a large group, which means that you're going to pose a question, what's the lesson that parent was trying to teach to the larger group? And anybody in the large group can respond to it. And so that's a large group discussion. Attributional discussions are important because they give the group an opportunity to make a commitment to the importance of a strategy. So if you ask parents, well, what's the lesson you're taking the time to teach here? And parents generate some of those rationales, then they've made a public commitment to that strategy. And that's a key part of the attitude change process. And it's important for parents to hear that other parents think this is important, or other parents can see some advantages in this. And parents are heavily influenced by what they perceive to be the norms in a group. And so the attitudes and experiences of other parents will be important. And attributional discussions give parents an opportunity to share their views on something. And it allows parents to develop a more elaborated rationale. If I'm a parent, I may think, well, this sounds like an okay idea, but if I hear over the course of a session, 2 or 3 other parents suggesting what the lesson this might teach is and how that might impact things over time, and what's the message I'm communicating to my son, and taking the time to do that. Those public rationales, supporting rationales, provide parents with more encouragement. And communicative attributions create a kind of an affective commitment, which is important. You get a chance to think about what's the message you're really giving your son, and taking the time to do that. Well, you know, that he's just the most important thing to me, or he's my top priority, or I'm really interested in the things that he's interested in. And that often is an affective commitment or affective motivation. So some attributional discussions, what's the lesson this is teach, generate a kind of logical rationale for doing things. Communicative attributions generate an affective rationale, and both of those are an important part of the parenting change process. And attributional discussions can help the group reach a consensus that we agree that this is an idea that makes sense. And again, that's an important part of the change process. And of course, long-term attributions, what would be the effect of this if we used it over time, affect those often erroneous short-term expectations that parents come with. Rather than looking for changes right now, it encourages parents to think in the long term what the advantages of a strategy might be. Now let me say a little something about time management. I pointed out a few examples yesterday, but in the manual you'll find some time guidelines for each part of the session, and those are flexible, but we suggest that you stay as close to those as you possibly can. We typically make up an agenda for the evening, so it's usually large on a laminated sheet of paper, and it's got the key parts of the session in it: homework discussions, troubleshooting videos, modeling, and we put a time with each of those, and that helps the group keep track of where they're at, and it gives a sense of how long an activity is going to last. And there are members of the group that will help you keep the group on task, keep the structure of the evening organized. One of the things that you heard me doing was giving parents prompts prior to subgroup tasks. You could just take about a minute each and give an example of a situation where you used when-then strategies at your house, and situation you thought you handled well. So we often give parents time prompts prior to activities, just again to give them a little bit of structure within which to work. When you're going around and listening to subgroup discussions, say we're talking about the errors on a videotape, and you hear that one group has really kind of nailed the idea, and maybe another group has also got it, you don't need to let all of the groups explore all possible errors on the tape. Once you've got a range of the key errors, then you can think about coming back to a large group discussion. And let's start with this group here, and maybe start with the group that really has the key error. The longer you let the subgroup discussions go, the more they tend to kind of drift. So that parents often very quickly identify the key errors on the tape. Or if you're asking parents to suggest alternatives, they often pretty quickly will come up with something pretty close to the key strategy for the session. If you let them continue to talk, then two things happen. One is that they tend to drift a little bit further afield and talk about it, and the energy tends to kind of start to fade. And you can hear when you give parents a chance to talk about what went wrong here, you'll hear a lot of energy in the room, kind of feel the energy in the discussion. And they talk about it, and you gradually kind of hear that energy level going down, and they're drifting a little bit further afield in their discussions. And so stopping the small group discussions a little bit earlier when you've got a few key ideas keeps the energy level up in the group, saves a little bit of your time, and keeps the group a little bit closer to the task. So time management is something that you'll be thinking about a lot in running COPE programs. It's probably the most difficult part of running this type of a parenting program is parents could spend the entire evening talking about homework, or they could spend the entire evening just talking about the videotapes. And so you have to kind of manage the time fairly aggressively. Begin with a group having a good example. The two parts of the session that you don't want to shortchange are always modeling, because that's really where most of the learning takes place, and homework planning, because that's really where the rubber meets the road. That's where parents begin to actually think about how they could use this strategy at home. And so those are the two most important parts of the session, and we always want to make sure that if we've had to use a little bit more time in one part of the session, that those are the parts of the session that we always make sure we complete. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take you through another session. The session we're going to be working on today is planning ahead. And planning ahead is a difficult strategy because a lot of parents don't do it. They may plan by saying, listen, we're going to do something, this is what I want you to do. They do the planning, but the idea of actually getting kids involved in thinking through the situation is relatively new. So the strategy that we're going to be working on is one where if parents were expecting a phone call, for example, they might say, I'm expecting an important phone call this afternoon. What could you do to help out? Well, I could try to keep the noise down, play quietly in the other room. Okay, that'd be really helpful. And then, of course, kids tend to forget that, so when that phone rings, parents would stop and say, hey, what was that plan that you had? Oh, yeah, I was going to try to keep the noise down and play quietly. Okay, that's great. And while you're on the phone, great job, perfect. A lot of reinforcement along the way. If it looks like kids have just made, they've forgotten a little bit noisy, maybe just ignoring that. If it looks like they've completely forgotten the plan, stopping and giving them a chance to go back and remind themselves, what was that plan you had? Oh yeah, I was going to try to keep the noise down. That's great, thanks a lot. So that's the strategy that we're going to work on today, and that's a difficult strategy to build for some parents because it's relatively new for them. So you'll build it in a series of small components. So I'm going to spend most of the morning working through this session with you, and we'll go through each component of the video for this one. So that's the session that we're going to do. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is in each of your subgroups, if you could pick a subgroup leader who can take a few notes tonight. So subgroup leader here in this group. Thank you very much, Monica. Subgroup leader here. Kathy, thanks. Subgroup leader here. Okay. Thank you. Here, this group. Lane, thanks. You don't want to let the group spend a lot of time on this. They'll go for 5 or 10 minutes sort of thinking about how to do this. So you kind of have to go around and move the process quickly. Okay, can somebody summarize the strategy that we were working on last week? What was the strategy we were working on? It was actually last night, wasn't it? Okay, transitional warnings. 5 minutes, be time to put your toys away and get ready for bed. Or when this program's over, time for dinner, something like that. What was the other strategy you were working on last week? Okay, showing interest in kids again, watching what they're doing, listening, looking for opportunities to compliment. And there was another strategy that you guys had suggested. Okay, when-then strategies, when-then strategies. Okay, when you've got your room cleaned up, then you can watch television. When your homework's done, then you can get on the internet. When-then strategies. So what I'd like you to do is, in your subgroups, take not more than about a minute each, because we have a lot to get through this evening, about a minute each, and describe an example of a situation where you used transitional warnings or when-then strategies, and you thought you did a pretty good job. Again, don't worry about how kids responded. This is just a chance for you to practice this week. So a situation where you thought you did a good job. And if you hear nice examples, somebody used a strategy in an interesting situation, or you thought they did it well, tell them, you did a great job with that. That was nicely done. So go ahead, each give one example. Okay, just another minute. We'll come back together as a large group. Okay, let's come back together as a large group. Let me get out of role. Just one of the things you'll find is that you'll have some groups that have a hard time getting started. And maybe they're chatty groups that really enjoy conversation, or maybe they're just a little quieter group that has trouble getting the ball rolling. But if you walk and stand by a table, then they'll generally start the conversation. So it kind of helps them get started. So if there are groups that you need to motivate to move along, then you can do that. So again, leaders are just wandering around from the perspective of parents, but it's a really active part of the session where you're paying attention to what's going on, you're listening to good ideas, you're getting a sense of how groups are functioning. So that's one of the things that I was doing. Let's start with this group here. What was one example of a situation where you guys used transitional warnings, or when then this week? When American Idol is done, it'll be time to brush your teeth and get ready for bed. That's a good one. I like that. This one? Okay, when you get your dinner finished, then you can watch Barney. This one? Okay, when your homework's done, then you can go outside and play ball. This group? Okay, when you finish your bath, then we can sit down and read a story together. And out of role, your job as a leader, again, is to try to do summary modeling. It's easy with this particular session. Transitional warnings and when-thens are relatively easy to give a good summary model of, but try to summarize as many examples as you can. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to show a segment of video here, and I'd like you to watch it and talk about what happens.
Well, this point system may be working to get her up in the morning and get her to school on time. But boy, she sure interrupts me a lot when I'm on the phone. She just doesn't listen when I tell her not to. She just doesn't think. I'm glad you called. Yeah, hang on a second. Jacqueline, this is an important phone call. Will you turn that television down?
Sorry, I didn't know.
Sorry about that. No, I don't know. She just doesn't...
Okay, what went wrong here? Take a few minutes in your groups and talk about what went wrong. Okay, just take another minute. I'd give real groups a little more time, but not too much. Okay, let's come back together as a large group, and let me hear just from the subgroup leaders, just one person at a time, so everyone can hear. Let's start with this group back here. Kathy, what was one of the things that?
Well, we were discussing that even before the phone rang, the mom was feeling really negative about the girl, and it was really making her assumptions that she does think mom says it, and really, I think he's attributing it to like no.
Okay. So she was really thinking kind of negatively about her daughter, and do people agree with that? How was that affecting her? Why was that a problem? Okay, so even before anything happened, she was tense, kind of preconditioned. People agree with that? Okay. Let me just get out of role. A lot of the videos in the COPE program have a think aloud of this type where parents think about a situation in a counterproductive way, and we want parents to pay attention to those inner dialogues, if you would, and then think about how that might be affecting their parenting and how to approach that differently. So lots of the scenarios have those cognitions, if you would. So this was a good example. This group, a different thing that had gone wrong. Okay, so this was an important phone call, and there wasn't really any warning or discussion about it. People agree with that? Okay. This group?
Well, we had all those, but her tone, her voice, harsh, and realistically, we didn't think it was so bad.
Okay. But kind of a harsh tone of voice?
It was a harsh tone of voice, and she was getting negatively warnings. She was really thinking negatively, and she reacted the same way.
Okay.
And at the same time, you gotta question if this is done for attention.
Okay.
Instead of, listening to the daughter speak cooperative, it's
Do people agree with that? Kind of a negative tone of kind of an authoritarian type of parenting? Okay. This group? So she was just kind of yelling from the other room? Okay, people agree with that? Okay, so she got herself angry and tense before anything happened. When she interacted with her daughter, she was kind of yelling from one room to the other. Her tone of voice was really quite negative. And there wasn't really any preparation for this or discussion about the issue of phone calls. People agree with that?
There's no expectation. She wasn't teaching any behavior.
Okay.
So if things just happen, she's been frustrated. The daughter should know these things. You don't teach her, they don't know.
Okay. Well, go back to your groups and talk about how would you have done this differently? What advice would you have for the parent on the tape? Okay, just another minute and we'll come back together as a large group. Okay, let's come back together as a large group. And let's start with this group. And let me hear, just from the subgroup leaders, just one person at a time so everyone can hear. What was one of the things that your group suggested might be helpful here? Just one of them.
Going up to her when the phone was ringing, going up to her and letting her know, don't get this phone call. Please, quiet.
Okay, so she could prepare for this if the phone call comes, maybe have a bit of a discussion with her about how to handle the situation. Okay, do people agree with that? Okay, expecting a phone call, from getting a phone call. This group? Okay, so she could think some things differently to herself. What kinds of things could she say to herself to keep from getting so upset in this situation? Okay, so try to think about some positive things that she's done and maybe even point those out. You know, I really appreciate you've been really helpful in the evenings. You did a great job, you know, with your homework last night. I was really proud of you. Try to think of some positive things. People agree with that as a way of countering that tendency to think negatively? Hear this group? Okay. Okay, when I'm done with my phone call, then we can watch TV together. People agree with that? Okay, here, this group? Okay. So even if phone calls are a problem, then she can anticipate that by sitting down and prepare her daughter. You know, phone calls I get in the afternoons are really important, and something like that. People agree with that? Okay, well, let's watch what happens next here.
Tiffany, I am expecting a very important telephone call this afternoon. I don't want you to make any noise, and you are not to put the television set on.
Okay, now there's a mom who was trying a little planning ahead. What went wrong there? Okay, just another minute. We'll come back together as a large group. Let me just get out a roll. One of the things this is in our experience, probably one of the most difficult sessions for parents to come up with the strategies because they're relatively new for some parents. Parents are used to giving instructions, but they're not used to that more collaborative kind of planning, which is the goal of this. And so this is one where when you're going around and listening to the groups, you really want to listen for a group that seems to have the notion of collaborative planning down. So you're going to do that in most sessions, but on this one in particular, this is one where groups sometimes have to reach for it. They can see the errors, but this is a relatively new strategy.